I never thought my own son would try to kill me on my birthday. On my 68th birthday, I received a mysterious gift. No card, no sender's name, just a few cold words on a plain white card. Happy birthday. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was Ethan's. My son. The boy I had raised for 20 years. The man I hadn't seen or spoken to in 3. You don't forget the hand that once wrote Father's Day cards in messy block letters, or the same hand that used to leave quick notes on the fridge before running out with friends. That handwriting was a part of me, as familiar as my own. The box itself was heavy. Inside, nestled in tissue, was a limited edition bottle of whiskey, the kind designed to be more impressive on a shelf than in a glass. The green and gold label shimmered under the kitchen light, the wax seal perfectly intact, as if it had been waiting all its life to be broken on some momentous occasion. It was the sort of bottle that cost more than any working man with common sense would ever pay. The irony wasn't lost on me. Whiskey used to be my thing. After long days fixing fence posts or patching gutters, I'd pour myself a glass, let the burns soften the edges of the day. Back when Linda was alive, she'd join me. On Sundays we'd sit on the porch swing, the crickets doing most of the talking. But 3 years ago, the heart attack had taken all that away. The doctor gave me a laundry list of things I couldn't touch if I wanted to see 70. Whiskey was at the very top. Ethan knew that. He was there in the hospital, sitting in the corner, thumbing at his phone while the doctor told me straight that if I wanted to live, I had to change. He hadn't said much back then, and I told myself it was his way of coping. But now, seeing that bottle, I wasn't so sure. We hadn't fought, not really. We just stopped. First he missed a Sunday dinner, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas. Silence grows roots if you let it. By the second Christmas without him, it was like we lived in different worlds. And now, after 3 years, I was staring at his handwriting again. But instead of relief or joy, I felt only a strange heaviness in my chest. I pushed the bottle aside and went back to my coffee, which had gone cold. The clock over the stove ticked steady, reminding me of how empty the house was. My mind turned to Robert Carson, Ethan's father-in-law. A man cut from the kind of cloth that doesn't fray. He was the kind who showed up before you asked, hammer in hand, ready to climb your roof after a storm. The kind who'd never arrive empty-handed. If anyone deserved something nice, it was him. And since I couldn't drink the whiskey myself, letting it gather dust on my shelf felt wrong. Robert would open it, share it with friends, and maybe even give it a story. By afternoon, I had buckled the bottle into the passenger seat of my old Chevy like it was a passenger. The October sun slanted low, painting the fields along County Road 6 in shades of amber. Robert's house sat on a rise at the edge of town, white clapboard in a wraparound porch that always looked like it belonged on a postcard. He opened the door before I could knock, sawdust still clinging to his boots. "Frank, what's this?" he asked, his eyes on the bottle in my hands. "From Ethan," I said. "Figured you'd enjoy it more than I would." His eyebrows lifted. "Ethan sent you this?" "Yeah," I said. "It's a nice bottle. Too nice to waste on me." Robert turned it in his hands, read the label like it was scripture. "This is something, Frank. This is the kind of bottle you save for a special night." "Then make tonight special," I told him. He grinned and nodded. "I think I will. Thank you." It felt good to hand it off, to see it land where it belonged. Driving home, though, I couldn't shake the itch. Ethan had never been the type to spend money like that, not without a reason. Half the time when he was younger, he was borrowing cash for gas and forgetting to pay it back. Why now? Why a gift he knew I wouldn't touch? That night, I cooked a pot roast for one. The smell filled the house the way memories do, lingering, reminding you what you've lost. I'd just finished washing dishes when the phone rang. No one calls the landline anymore. "Hello, Dad." Ethan's voice. Smooth. Casual. Like no time had passed. "Ethan, happy birthday." The words came a beat too late. "You got my gift?" "I did." "Well, what do you think?" "It's a nice bottle. You try it yet?" His tone shifted, sharper around the edges. "No. I gave it to Robert. Thought he'd get more use out of it." Silence. Not static, not a dropout, just silence. "You gave it to Robert?" His voice had cooled. "That's right." I heard an exhale, long and measured. "Huh." Then the line went dead. I stared at the receiver, unsettled. It wasn't the pot roast sitting heavy in my gut. It was Ethan's reaction. The way he asked about the whiskey, like it mattered more than it should. I went to bed restless, sleep a shallow tide that never carried me far from shore. The next morning, the phone rang again. A local number I didn't recognize. Mr. Dalton? A woman's voice said. Yes. This is Linda Carson, Robert's wife. Her voice was tight, stretched thin. I thought you should know. Robert's in the hospital. He collapsed this morning. They think it might be some kind of poisoning. The coffee in my hand went cold instantly. Poisoning. He was fine last night, she said. We had a drink with dinner, and this morning he could barely stand. The doctors are running tests. My eyes drifted to the counter, to the empty space where the whiskey had been. Did he eat anything unusual? She asked. No, I said, my throat dry. But I gave him a bottle yesterday. Whiskey. From Ethan? A pause. I could hear hospital monitors in the background, the squeak of a cart, voices echoing down a corridor. I'll tell the doctors, she said finally. If you think of anything else, anything at all, call me. I promised I would. After I hung up, I just stood there in the kitchen, the October light pale and unforgiving. My eyes caught on the trash bin. Something white peeked out near the bottom. A small plastic vial, like the kind vitamins come in. No label, just a dusting of powder inside. I didn't remember throwing it away. I pulled it out, turned it in my hand. The cap was screwed on tight. On the fridge shelf, I noticed the mason jar, half a cup of whiskey I'd poured for Robert before handing him the bottle. I hadn't even remembered keeping it. My hands shook as I set it beside the vial. Gary. He was the only one I could call. We'd served together 30 years ago, and now he ran a small veterinary lab. He owed me a favor from a winter I'd pulled his truck out of a ditch. Gary, I need you to test something for me, I said when he picked up. What is it? Whiskey. And maybe something else. He didn't press for details. Just told me to meet him after closing. That evening, I drove out to his lab, the mason jar wrapped in a paper bag like contraband. Gary met me outside, lab coat over his sweatshirt. This the kind of thing I'll regret? He asked. Just tell me what's in it. He nodded, took the bag, and disappeared inside. I sat in the truck, engine running, watching the sky bleed into night. Ethan's voice replayed in my head. The long pause when I told him Robert had the whiskey. The weight of it sat like a stone in my stomach. The next day, Gary called. His voice was heavy. Frank, you're not gonna like this. There's something in the whiskey. White snake root. Enough of it will stop a man's heart. I closed my eyes. The phone felt like lead in my hand. Robert drank this, I said. You didn't. No. Gary let out a slow breath. Then you might have just dodged a bullet. When the call ended, the house went so quiet it was as if it was holding its breath. Ethan hadn't just sent me a gift. He'd sent me a message. And that was only the beginning. I used to think there was no sound worse than the phone ringing in the middle of the night. Turns out there is. The phone ringing when you already know, deep down, the news will be bad. When Gary hung up after telling me about the white snake root, the world around me went still, like the house itself was holding its breath. I didn't sit with it. I grabbed my jacket, slid my truck keys off the hook, and headed for St. Luke's. The drive into town was all stoplights and empty intersections. The kind of late morning where the sun looks bright, but doesn't give off any warmth. I parked in the far corner out of habit and walked fast, one hand in my pocket, the other pressed against my ribs, as if I could steady the churn inside me. Hospitals always smell the same. Something sterile, cut with burnt coffee. And the light is always too white. A volunteer pointed me toward Robert's room. He didn't look like the man who had climbed my roof without being asked, or the man who could outwork men half his age. He looked washed out, skin paler than the pillow under his head. The monitors beeped with stubborn rhythm, slow and uneven. Linda sat in a plastic chair pulled as close as it could go. She looked up when I entered. Frank, she said, standing. Thank you for coming. How is he? They're trying to stabilize his heart rhythm. Her hands were clasped together, not in prayer, but as if she was holding something inside her. They said they found signs of a plant toxin. They're running more tests. I stepped closer. Robert's mouth was parted just enough for the faint line of breath to escape. His hair, usually combed neatly back, had fallen across his forehead. It made him look younger and weaker all at once. Did he eat or drink anything unusual last night? I asked. We both had one glass with dinner. Her eyes flicked to mine. The unspoken question already there. The bottle you brought. He said it was the nicest whiskey he'd ever tasted. Wanted to save the rest for something special. My jaw tightened. I need you to tell the doctors exactly that. Tell them it was new, unopened. and tell them I can get them a small sample from the same bottle. Her hand lifted as if to take mine, but instead she gripped the rail of the bed. Frank, what is this? Do you think? I don't know what I think, I said, but I'm going to find out. The doctor came in then, a man in his 50s with a face practiced in neutrality. He explained in calm tones about rhythms and enzymes and observation. He said little about what he didn't know, which was plenty. When he left, Linda sat back down. I promised to call her if I had anything useful. She nodded, but it was a nod without weight. Her hands stayed clenched around the rail, as if prying them loose might cause everything else to unravel. I left with my jaw locked and my hands stuffed deep in my jacket pockets. The automatic doors slid open and the October air slapped me, bright as a postcard and cold as a church. In the truck, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat, looking at my reflection in the rear view. I looked like a man who had nothing left to break that hadn't already cracked once. White snake root, I said aloud, just to hear it. The words sounded mean, deliberate. On the way home, the road unspooled like an old tape. The mailboxes, the man raking leaves with his boy, the corner dog, all passed without registering. I parked, locked the truck, and went straight to the refrigerator. The mason jar with the whiskey was still there, hidden behind the milk. I held it up to the light. It looked harmless. That's how the worst things come, dressed up as nothing at all. I set it down and crossed to the trash. The little white vial was gone. I know my own hands. I hadn't moved it. But the trash bag had been lifted and set back the wrong way around. Someone had been in my house. I looked at the doors, the windows. The deadbolt was still set. Windows latched. I kept no spare key under rocks or mats, never had. Still, someone had been here. You don't need evidence for that. You feel it in your bones. I breathed in slow. Panic is loud and stupid. I needed quiet and useful. I called Gary. It's gone, I said. What is? The vial. Someone took it out of my trash. He didn't waste time doubting me. Gary knows the cost of ignoring your gut. You need to get law enforcement involved. I can document the whiskey, but that vial, that was clean proof of handling. I know, I said. And Frank. Yeah. Don't let whoever did this think you're asleep. I'm not. I hung up and made coffee I didn't want. Sat at the table with a legal pad. The act of writing steadies me. I drew a line down the middle of the page. What I know on one side, what I can prove on the other. Under what I know. Ethan sent the bottle. Ethan asked if I'd tried it. Ethan's voice changed when I told him I gave it to Robert. The whiskey tested positive for white snake root. The vial was missing. Under what I can prove. Gary's test. The mason jar sample. Ethan's phone call. If my memory held. I stared at the two lists, wanting a bridge between them. But bridges don't appear just because you want them. You have to build them. From the desk drawer, I pulled out an old digital voice recorder. Scuffed at the corners, but reliable. Battery half full. I slid it into my jacket pocket. I wasn't going to let this slide into silence. Not again. That night, I slept in the recliner, not the bed. The bedroom felt too exposed. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the faintest creak of a floorboard in the hall. My breath caught. I waited, every muscle taut. The sound didn't come again, but I knew better. At dawn, I checked the locks. Still set. Windows latched. But the rug in the hallway was shifted slightly off-center. I hadn't touched it. Someone wanted me to know they'd been there. By mid-morning, I was back at the hospital. Robert was awake, but weak, his voice like gravel. Linda stepped out to get coffee, leaving us alone. Frank, he rasped. That bottle, something was wrong with it. I know, I said. He blinked slowly, the weight of it sinking into him. Ethan, I didn't answer. His hand trembled against the rail, but his eyes were steady. He knew. When Linda came back, I excused myself. In the parking lot, I pressed my hand against the roof of my truck, grounding myself against the spin of everything. My son had tried to kill me, and when I dodged, he'd nearly killed the one man who had never failed me. The bond between father and son is supposed to be iron. I was starting to learn how brittle iron can be when rust has eaten it from the inside. And that's where Act 1 ends, not with resolution, but with a fracture. With a truth I couldn't yet prove, but could no longer deny. Ethan had sent me more than a gift. He'd sent me a warning, and I was just beginning to understand the cost of opening it. The morning after Robert's collapse, I sat at the kitchen table with the mason jar of whiskey in front of me. The October light caught the amber liquid and made it glow, beautiful as stained glass. You'd never know by looking that it could stop a man's heart. That's the thing about poison. It doesn't look evil. It doesn't scream a warning. It just waits, quiet, patient, until you let your guard down. I picked up the phone, stared at it, and set it back down. Calling the police seemed simple enough on paper. But what did I have? A lab report from a friend who owed me a favor. A leftover sample in a mason jar. And my word against Ethan's. My own son. What would I even say? My boy tried to kill me, but accidentally poisoned his father-in-law instead? They'd look at me the way people do when they're being polite, but don't believe a word you say. I thought about Linda, sitting at Robert's bedside, clinging to hope. I thought about Ethan's voice on the phone, that heavy silence after I told him Robert had the bottle. And I thought about the missing vial from my trash. Someone had been in my house. That meant this wasn't just between me and Ethan anymore. Someone else was involved. Maybe helping him. Maybe watching me. I took the recorder from my pocket, turned it over in my hands. If the law wouldn't believe me yet, I'd have to build my own case. Carefully, quietly. That afternoon, I called Ethan. He didn't pick up. I left a message. Son, we need to talk. About the gift. My voice cracked on the last word, like it wasn't just a bottle of whiskey, but everything between us. Hours passed with no reply. At dusk, I drove out toward the old quarry. It wasn't a place I visited often anymore, but it had been ours once. Ethan was 15 the first time I brought him there. We skipped stones until our arms ached, and he asked me if I thought he'd ever be good enough to make the football team. I told him he was good enough for anything. He'd smiled at me then, open and honest in a way he hadn't been in years. Now, the quarry sat silent, filled with rainwater and ringed with graffiti. I parked on the shoulder, engine idling, and waited. I don't know what I thought would happen. That Ethan would show up, like old times, sensing I was there. But the only thing that came was the night, settling over the water like a heavy blanket. Back home, the answering machine blinked red. One new message. Ethan's voice, clipped and distant. Don't call me again. You don't know what you're getting into. I sat down hard in the chair, the machine still humming from the playback. Not what you're doing. Not what you're saying. But what you're getting into. That meant there was more. Something bigger. The next morning, I drove back to Gary's lab. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes. Frank, he said, pulling me inside. You stirred something up. What do you mean? 2 guys came by last night after you left. Said they were from the state agriculture office. Wanted to see my lab, my records. Asked if anyone had brought in unusual plant samples recently. My stomach tightened. What did you tell them? That nothing had come in. But Frank, he leaned closer. They weren't state. I've been in this town too long. I know how bureaucrats talk. These guys, one of them had military bearing. The other was too polished. Like a salesman with teeth. Did they mention Ethan? No. But they described you. I felt the blood drain from my face. Frank, Gary said carefully, you need to be smart about this. Whoever's tied up in this, they've got reach. I drove home with my hands clamped tight on the wheel. The road blurred by, familiar houses and fields suddenly feeling foreign. If strangers were asking about me, if they'd been sniffing around Gary, then this wasn't just family betrayal anymore. This was something organized, planned. Back at the house, I pulled out the old lockbox I kept in the hall closet. Inside were papers, Linda's death certificate, the deed to the house, Ethan's birth certificate, proof of the life I'd built and the people I'd lost. I stared at Ethan's name on the certificate, the ink faded but still legible. Proof that once he'd been mine. The phone rang again. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A male voice, calm, smooth. Mr. Dalton? Yes. You have something that belongs to us. We suggest you hand it over. My throat went dry. Who is this? Silence for a beat. Then, the sample. From the bottle. We know you kept some. Bring it to the rest area off Highway 17 tomorrow at midnight. Leave it in the 3rd trash can by the vending machines. If you don't, people will get hurt. The line went dead. I sat there with the receiver in my hand, my pulse pounding. They knew. About the mason jar. About me. And they weren't afraid to threaten me. I locked every door, drew every curtain. Sat at the table with the jar in front of me, the amber liquid catching the dim light. A few ounces of whiskey that suddenly felt heavier than stone. For the first time, I wondered if Ethan wasn't just reckless, or cruel, or lost. What if he was part of something bigger? What if he'd become something I didn't recognize at all? The clock ticked toward midnight. I stared at the jar, my reflection warped in the glass. And I knew one thing. Whatever I was tangled in, I couldn't back out now. The night of the call, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the mason jar on the table beside me, listening for every creak of the old house, every groan of the pipes. At one point, around 3 a.m., I thought I heard a car idle outside. I eased the curtain back a fraction, just taillights fading at the end of the street. Morning came gray and cold. I made coffee I didn't drink, stared at the jar, and tried to think. Whoever had called knew too much. They knew about the sample, about me. If I did as they asked, leave it in a trash can at some rest stop, what would stop them from coming after me anyway? On the other hand, if I didn't, they'd make good on their threat. People will get hurt. My gut said one thing. These weren't people who made idle threats. I packed the mason jar in a box, wrapped in towels. But I also packed something else, an old service revolver I hadn't fired in years, kept oiled in a lockbox out in the shed. I checked the chamber, slipped it into a shoulder holster under my jacket. The weight was familiar. Uncomfortable, but familiar. All day, I went about routine, raking the yard, fixing a loose shutter, pretending at normalcy. But my mind was already at the rest stop, running scenarios over and over. By the time the clock edged past 11, I was on Highway 17. The blacktop stretched ahead under a starless sky. I drove with the headlights off for a mile, then flicked them back on. Paranoia, maybe. Or maybe caution. The rest area was deserted, the vending machines humming under weak fluorescent lights. I pulled in slow, scanned the lot. Empty. Just the echo of my tires on cracked pavement. I got out with the box under my arm. Walked to the third trash can like they'd said. The lid squeaked when I lifted it. I set the box inside, shut the lid, and turned to leave. That's when I saw him. Across the lot, leaning against the far vending machine. A man in a dark jacket, arms folded, watching. He didn't move. Didn't wave. Just watched. I froze. My hand twitched toward the revolver under my jacket, but I forced it still. The man tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. Then, without a word, he pushed off the machine, got into a black SUV, and drove away. No headlights. I stood there in the silence long after the sound of the engine faded. Driving home, every shadow on the roadside looked like a figure waiting. Every car behind me felt like a tail. I took back roads, doubled around twice, and didn't pull into my driveway until nearly 3. The jar was gone, but the feeling in my gut told me I hadn't bought peace. I'd only shown them I could be pushed. The next morning, I went to the hospital. Robert was awake, pale but stronger. Linda stepped out for a smoke, leaving us alone. They know. Frank, Robert whispered. His voice was gravel, but his eyes were steady. Who? I asked. Them. Whoever Ethan's tied up with. He coughed, winced. I saw a man in the hall last night. Suit, clean cut. He wasn't staff. He looked at me like he knew everything. Then he just walked on. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. You tell Linda? No. No reason to scare her more. But Frank, he fixed me with a look. You need to be careful. If Ethan's with them, you can't trust anyone. Not the cops. Not even me, maybe. The words sat heavy between us. That afternoon, Gary called again. His voice was tight. Frank, I'm shutting the lab for a while. Too many questions being asked. Too many faces I don't recognize parked outside at night. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be. Just don't call me again. Not until this blows over. Another door closed. Another ally gone. Days blurred. I tried Ethan's number again and again. No answer. Sometimes a voicemail, sometimes nothing but silence. Once, late at night, I picked up the phone and heard breathing on the other end. No words. Just slow, steady breathing. I hung up, heart hammering. By the end of the week, I was unraveling. Sleep came in shallow snatches. The house felt like a stage, every creak an audience waiting. I stopped turning on lights at night, moved through rooms in the dark. Then came the letter. No return address. Just my name on the envelope, in block letters. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Stop digging, or Linda will bury her husband alone. I crumpled it in my fist, felt my stomach churn. This wasn't about me anymore. They were willing to hurt anyone connected. Robert, Linda, maybe more. That night, I sat at the table with the revolver in front of me. Loaded, heavy. I turned it over, thought about all the years since I'd last held it in anger. Thought about Ethan, his first baseball game, his crooked smile when he graduated high school, the way he'd hugged me at Linda's funeral. And now this. Was he a pawn in something bigger? Or had he chosen this path himself? I didn't have answers. Only the growing certainty that whatever game I'd stumbled into, I was already losing. The next morning, the phone rang. Linda's voice, broken. "Frank, Robert's gone." The world tilted. He had a setback overnight. They tried, but her words dissolved into sobs. I sat down hard, the receiver pressed to my ear. The sound of her crying cut through me sharper than any blade. Robert, the man who'd stood by me when Ethan drifted away. The man who'd been family when my own blood turned cold. Gone. And it was my fault. The bottle had been meant for me. The poison had been meant for me. And Robert had paid the price. When I hung up, the house felt emptier than it ever had. Silence pressed in from every wall. That was the moment hope cracked. Whatever fight I thought I had in me, whatever chance I thought I had to set this right, it felt like it had just died along with Robert Carson. And Act 2 ended there, in the wreckage of a choice I never made, staring into a darkness I didn't yet understand. Robert's death hollowed me out. For days afterward, I moved through the house like a shadow, eating without tasting, sleeping without rest. Every corner of the place seemed to carry his absence. I'd catch myself looking at the phone, half expecting Linda to call with better news, as if the whole thing had been some cruel mistake. But no call came. Robert was gone, and the silence he left behind was heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Linda didn't blame me, not out loud. She thanked me at the funeral for bringing the bottle, said Robert had enjoyed it so much he wanted to save the rest. Her words were kind, but her eyes told a different story. Eyes that asked why. Eyes that wondered if I'd done more harm than good. I couldn't blame her. The service was small, a few close friends, family, and some of the men he'd worked with over the years. I stood off to the side, alone, feeling like I didn't belong. Ethan wasn't there. I don't know if that was better or worse. Afterward, I drove home on roads blurred by rain. I parked in the driveway and sat in the truck long after the engine went quiet, staring at the steering wheel. The mason jar was gone now, handed over at that rest stop. Robert was dead. Ethan was silent. And I was out of moves. For the first time, I thought seriously about giving up, letting it go, pretending none of it had ever happened. But then I'd picture Robert on that hospital bed, Linda's hands clenched in her lap, the note that had warned me to stop digging, or else. Giving up wasn't an option. 2 nights after the funeral, the knock came. Not loud, not frantic, just steady, deliberate. I froze, listening. It was close to midnight. No one came to my door at that hour, not anymore. I slid the revolver from under the cushion, thumbed back the hammer, and approached the door. "Who is it?" I called. A pause. Then a woman's voice, low and calm. "You don't know me, Mr. Dalton. But I know what happened to Robert Carson. And I know about your son." My chest tightened. I looked through the peephole. A woman stood on the porch in a dark coat, hood pulled up against the drizzle. I didn't recognize her. "Go away," I said. "If you close the door, they'll win. And you'll be next." That gave me pause. I kept the chain latched, opened the door a crack. "Talk fast." She pulled her hood back. Mid-30s, sharp eyes, hair tied back in a loose braid. She looked like someone who'd spent more nights awake than asleep. "My name's Claire," she said. "I used to work with your son." The words hit harder than I expected. "What do you want with me?" She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "Not here. We can't talk here. They're watching your house." My pulse quickened. "Prove it," I said. She reached into her coat slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a folded photo. She slid it through the crack. I opened it with one hand, while keeping the revolver in the other. It was a picture of Ethan, taken recently. He was standing beside 2 men in suits, one of them the same type Gary had described, military bearing, too stiff for civilian life. Ethan's smile was forced, his shoulders tight. I looked up at her. "You've got 5 minutes," I said, and unlatched the chain. Inside, she stood near the door, water dripping from her coat. She didn't ask to sit. "They call themselves the Directorate," she began. "It's not government, not exactly. Think of it as a consortium, part corporate, part military, part research. They operate off the books. No oversight, no accountability. And Ethan, he's been with them for almost 3 years. Recruited, groomed. They use people like him, smart enough to follow orders, desperate enough not to ask questions." I clenched my jaw. Desperate for what? Belonging? Purpose? Money? Take your pick. I looked at the photo again. My boy, standing with strangers, eyes hollow. Why the whiskey? I asked. She hesitated. They were testing something. A new application of an old toxin. Controlled doses, targeted effects. Your son was the delivery system. Whether he volunteered or was pressured, I don't know. The words rattled around in my skull, heavy and sharp. You're telling me Ethan tried to kill me as part of some experiment? Claire's gaze didn't waver. I'm telling you the bottle wasn't meant to be a gift. It was meant to be data. You were the variable. I sat down hard in the chair, revolver still in my hand. Why are you telling me this? Because I left them, she said simply. And no one leaves clean. I know too much. That makes me a liability. But I also know where they're vulnerable. And you're the one person they won't see coming. I barked a humorless laugh. I'm a 68-year-old man with a bad heart. They'll see me coming from a mile away. Her eyes softened, just slightly. They underestimated Robert. Look what it cost him. Don't let them underestimate you. The room went quiet. The clock ticked on the wall. Rain tapped against the windows. Finally, I lowered the revolver. What do you need from me? Not much, she said. Just a choice. Either you keep pretending you can outlast them, and you end up like Robert, or you come with me, and we fight back. The words hung in the air, heavy as the storm outside. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stir in my chest. Not hope exactly, but a spark. Then let's fight, I said. Claire stayed that night. Not because I trusted her yet, but because she insisted it wasn't safe for either of us to leave separately. She slept on the couch, her coat balled up for a pillow, while I sat in the recliner with the revolver resting on my lap. Every creak of the house made my shoulders tighten, but nothing came. By morning, the rain had cleared and the sky was washed clean, pale and brittle. Over black coffee, she laid it out in blunt strokes. The directorate isn't after you because of who you are, Frank. They're after you because of what Ethan is. I frowned. And what's that supposed to mean? They don't just recruit. They repurpose. People like your son, they're assets. They start as foot soldiers, but if they show aptitude, they get pulled deeper. Ethan wasn't just delivering a poison bottle. He was proving he could follow orders without asking why. The words landed like blows. I pictured Ethan as a boy, scraping his knees on the driveway, swearing he could ride without training wheels. Back then, his need to prove himself had seemed harmless. Now, it was being twisted into something ugly. Claire slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopied documents, grainy photos, notes scribbled in the margins. Some of the images made my stomach turn. Rows of caged animals, test subjects hooked up to monitors, chemical diagrams I couldn't make sense of. What am I looking at? I asked. Trial data, she said. The directorate's been experimenting for years. Poisons, pathogens, behavioral conditioning. White snakeroot is just one piece. They test, they refine, they discard. And Ethan, he's tied to one of the newer projects. Something bigger. I closed the folder, pushed it back toward her. And you expect me to believe all this? She met my eyes, steady. Do you think Robert died because of coincidence? The room went quiet again. I hated how easily she used his name as leverage, but she wasn't wrong. What do you want from me? I asked finally. Proof, she said. If we can get inside one of their safe houses, pull files, video, anything, something you can't dismiss as rumor. Something you can put in the hands of people who can't ignore it. And who would that be? She didn't answer right away. Not the police. Not the state. Maybe not even the feds. But there are journalists, whistleblower groups, people who still care about the truth. I laughed bitterly. You make it sound so simple. It's not, she said. It's dangerous. But it's the only way to drag them into the light. I rubbed my temples. And Ethan? She hesitated. If we find proof, you'll also find out just how deep he is. That's a choice only you can face. The silence after that felt like a canyon. 2 days later, we were parked across from a nondescript warehouse on the edge of town. Claire said it was one of their storage sites, disguised as an import business. Trucks came and went at odd hours. She'd been there before, back when she still wore their badge. Security? I asked. Minimal, for a place like this. Cameras, 2 guards inside. They don't expect anyone local to care enough to look twice. I shifted in the driver's seat, feeling the revolver heavy under my jacket. I hadn't done anything like this in decades, and back then it had been in uniform, with backup, not as an old man sneaking into a warehouse with a stranger. Claire reached over, touched my arm. If you're not ready, we can walk away. But if we do, you'll never know how far they've taken Ethan. I looked at her, then at the building. Let's do it. We waited until a truck pulled out. The gate left swinging open for a few seconds. We slipped in, hearts hammering. Inside smelled of oil and concrete. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed off the walls. Claire led the way, moving like she'd done it 100 times. We ducked into a side office, where metal file cabinets lined the walls. She knelt, picked the lock on the second drawer with practiced ease. Look for anything with code names, she whispered. They like to brand their projects. I rifled through folders, shipping manifests, inventory lists, nothing unusual. Then I found one stamped with a single word, Erebus. I opened it. Inside were reports, each page stamped confidential in red. The words blurred as I read. Human trials, compliance thresholds, cognitive erosion. My hands shook. What is this? I whispered. Claire glanced over my shoulder, her face pale. This is it. Erebus. It's not just poison. It's behavioral conditioning. They're testing ways to break people down, make them pliable. And if Ethan's tied to this, she trailed off. Footsteps echoed in the hall. We froze. Claire yanked the folder, slid it into her bag. We ducked behind the desk just as the office door creaked open. A guard stepped in, flashlight sweeping. My pulse hammered. The beam passed inches from my face. For a moment, I thought we were caught. Then the guard muttered, shut the drawer, and left. The door clicked shut. We exhaled together. Time to go, Claire whispered. We slipped back out, keeping low. At the truck, adrenaline still buzzing. We didn't speak until we were miles away. Claire pulled the folder from her bag, set it on the dash. Now you see, this isn't just about you, or Robert, or even Ethan. It's about control. They want to own people from the inside out. I stared at the folder, the word Erebus stamped across the front. My son's face flashed in my mind, smiling, frowning, silent. Was he a victim of this, or a willing hand? That was the truth I'd been avoiding. Ethan wasn't just lost to me. He might not even be himself anymore. And that realization, that my boy might have been reshaped into something unrecognizable, was the kind of truth that split a man in two. For the first time since this nightmare began, I understood the scale of what I was up against. And there was no going back. Claire and I didn't speak much on the drive back from the warehouse. The folder sat on the dash between us, heavy as stone even though it was just paper and ink. The word Erebus glared at me every time headlights swept across it. Proof. Finally, proof. But proof is a double-edged blade. It cuts the ones who wield it as easily as the enemy. Back at my house, we spread the papers across the kitchen table. Chemical formulas, test results, psychological reports with names blacked out. Some of the pages had handwritten notes in the margins, initials scrawled like signatures of ghosts. They'll know it's missing by morning, Claire said. We have to assume we're already burned. I rubbed my temples. Then what's the move? Call a journalist? Drop it on the internet? She shook her head. Too soon. We release this without context. They'll bury it as conspiracy theory. We need corroboration, video, testimony, something irrefutable. I looked at her, exhausted. You've been running from these people. Why didn't you burn all this down months ago? Her eyes flickered. Because until now, I didn't have someone to stand with me. The words hung there. I wanted to scoff, to tell her she picked the wrong old man to lean on. But part of me felt something stir, something I thought had gone cold years ago. The need to protect, to fight, to matter. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. We were both too wired to sleep. Finally, Claire laid her head on her arms and drifted off. I sat in the dim light, staring at Ethan's photo, at the tightness in his smile. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for the directorate to come knocking. I was going to take the fight to them. The next day, we drove 2 towns over to a storage unit Claire said she'd stashed supplies in. Inside were boxes of files, burner phones, a battered laptop. She pulled out a flash drive, slid it across the table. This is logs, she said. Schedules, internal memos. Nothing explosive on its own, but it matches the documents we lifted. Together, they paint a picture. I pocketed the drive. Then we take it to someone who'll listen. She hesitated. There's one name. A journalist, Daniel Price. Investigative type, burned bridges with half the agencies in D.C. because he wouldn't play ball. He's been sniffing around the directorate for years. If anyone will publish, it's him. Where is he? Denver. I nodded. Then that's where we go. But as we pulled back onto the highway, I spotted it. A black SUV in the mirror, 3 cars back. Same type I'd seen at the rest stop. It stayed with us through 2 exits. They've got us, I muttered. Claire's jaw tightened. Then we don't lead them to the journalist. We shake them first. She directed me off onto a county road that snaked into the hills. The SUV followed. My hands tightened on the wheel. Faster, she said. I floored it. The old truck roared, gravel spitting as we tore around bends. The SUV stayed close, too close. Headlights glared in the mirror, blinding. There, Claire pointed, an old logging trail cutting off to the right. I swerved hard, the truck bouncing as we hit the rutted dirt road. Branches scraped the sides, the headlights behind us struggling to keep up. After a mile, Claire shouted, "Kill the lights." I flicked them off. The woods swallowed us. I eased the truck down an embankment, heart pounding. The SUV roared past on the trail, its lights slicing through the trees before fading into distance. We sat in the darkness, breathing hard. "That won't hold them long," Claire whispered. "They'll double back." I looked at her. Then we moved fast. Denver tonight. We reached the city just before dawn, bone-tired and jittery. Claire made contact with Daniel Price in a dingy diner off Colfax Avenue. He was younger than I expected, early 40s, hair shaggy, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this," he said, flipping through the Erebus documents with reverence. "If this checks out." "It checks," Claire snapped. Price nodded. "Then we've got something. But I need more. Photos, testimony, anything that ties this directly to names. Otherwise, they'll scream forgery and no one will touch it." Claire sighed. "We're working on that." As they talked, I scanned the diner. 2 men at the counter, another in a booth by the window. My instincts prickled. Something was off. "Claire," I murmured. "We're burned." She followed my gaze. Her face tightened. "Back door. Now." We slipped out through the kitchen, the cook barely glancing up. Out in the alley, footsteps pounded behind us. A shout, then the crack of a gunshot. We ran. Bullets sparked against brick as we rounded a corner. Claire fired back once. The muzzle flashed bright in the dim alley. Tires squealed at the far end. Another SUV blocking the street. We dove through a chain-link fence, sprinted across a vacant lot. My lungs burned, my heart hammered like it wanted out of my chest. Finally, we ducked into an abandoned building, collapsed against the wall. Claire's hands shook as she reloaded. "They're tightening the net," she gasped. "They won't stop until they have us, or we're dead." I wiped sweat from my brow. "Then we hit back before they can close it." She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but I wasn't running anymore. Not from them. Not from Ethan. We spent the next 2 days holed up in a cheap motel on the edge of Denver, the kind of place where the carpet smelled of mildew and the front desk clerk didn't ask for ID as long as you paid cash. Claire patched together burner phones, wiped the laptop, kept moving the documents around in different bags so if we were hit, we'd never lose everything at once. I kept watch at the window, the revolver always within reach. On the 3rd night, we got the call. It was Ethan. "Dad." His voice came through the burner, thin and frayed. "Stop this. You don't know what you're doing." My throat tightened. "What did they do to you?" A pause. "They gave me a purpose. You never understood that." "They turned you into a weapon," I said. "You're wrong. I chose this. You think you know what you're fighting, but you don't. Walk away, Dad. Please." I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, beg him to come back. Instead, I said quietly, "Meet me. Just you and me. One last time." Another long pause. Then, "Tomorrow night. Old rail yard, east of town. Midnight." The line went dead. Claire's face was grim when I told her. "It's a trap." "I know. Then why go?" "Because he's still my son." She didn't argue. She just loaded her pistol and said, "Then we both go." The rail yard was a graveyard of rust and silence. Empty cars sat on twisted tracks, graffiti faded by rain. The air smelled of oil and cold metal. Claire and I moved through the shadows, nerves raw. Ethan stepped out from behind a boxcar. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, shoulders broader, eyes harder. But it was still him. My boy. "Dad." "Ethan." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he gestured. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," I said, "to see for myself." Claire's gun was already in her hand, aimed low but ready. From the shadows, figures emerged. 3 men in suits, the same type Gary had described. Directorate. One of them spoke, voice smooth as glass. Mr. Dalton, you've caused us quite a bit of trouble. Hand over the files, and we can all walk away. I felt Claire tense beside me. I looked at Ethan. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Something in me snapped then. All the silence, all the fear, all the loss. Robert, Linda's grief, nights spent waiting for footsteps outside my door. It all boiled up into one clear thought. Enough. I stepped forward, revolver raised. My voice shook but held. You don't get to take anything else from me. The suited man smiled thinly. Then you've chosen death. He raised his hand. Guns lifted in the shadows. But before the order came, Ethan moved. He stepped between me and the men, arms spread. Not him. The silence that followed was thicker than the night air. Ethan, I whispered. His eyes flicked to mine, full of something I hadn't seen in years. Doubt, pain, maybe even love. Then the shooting started. Claire's pistol barked. I fired until the revolver clicked empty. The rail yard lit with muzzle flashes, echoes slamming off steel and concrete. Ethan went down in the chaos. I couldn't tell if he was hit or taking cover. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the suits lay bleeding. The third was gone into the shadows. Claire was breathing hard, a graze on her arm. My hands shook around the empty revolver. And Ethan? Ethan was on his knees, blood seeping from his side. I dropped beside him. Stay with me, son. Stay? His hand found mine, weak, trembling. I didn't mean for Robert, his voice cracked. They said it was just a test. Tears blurred my eyes. We'll get you out. We'll fix this. He shook his head faintly. No fixing. Just end it. I held his hand until it went still. The rail yard was silent again, except for Claire's ragged breathing. The papers were still in her bag. Proof. Evidence. But all I saw was my boy, gone in my arms. That was the choice. I had fought. I had resisted. I had held on with everything I had. And I had lost him anyway. The directorate was wounded, not destroyed. The fight wasn't over. But for me, everything had already ended. The morning after the rail yard felt like waking up in someone else's skin. My hands still smelled of gunpowder, my clothes stiff with blood that wasn't mine. Claire had managed to get us out before dawn, driving in silence while I sat in the passenger seat, Ethan's final words replaying in my head until they blurred into nothing. We holed up in another motel, farther out this time, a place with faded curtains and a buzzing neon vacancy sign. Claire patched her arm, said little. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the revolver in my lap, empty chambers clicking under my thumb. When the sun broke through the blinds, I finally spoke. He tried to protect me. At the end, Claire didn't look up from the bandage she was tying. That's something. It's not enough, I said. My voice cracked on the words. Robert's gone. Ethan's gone. And the men behind this are still out there. I don't even know if we hurt them at all. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. You have a choice, Frank. We can take what we have, the Erebus files, the memos, the proof, and go public. Or we can disappear, vanish before they come for us again. I set the revolver down on the nightstand. And if we go public, they'll come harder. They'll try to discredit us, bury us, maybe kill us. But the truth will be out there. Once it's in the open, it can't be put back. And if we disappear? She hesitated. Then we live. Maybe a quiet life, maybe always looking over our shoulder. But no more fighting. I stared at the threadbare carpet, at the sun cutting stripes across it. For most of my life, choices had been simple. Fix the roof, pay the bills, raise the boy. Now, the choice was between truth and survival, between carrying Ethan's death as a weight or as a weapon. That afternoon, Daniel Price found us. I don't know how he tracked us down, but he knocked twice and walked in like he'd been expected. He looked wired, running on caffeine and adrenaline. I've got editors sniffing, he said, dropping into the chair by the window. They'll run the story if we can give them enough. The files, the photos, your testimony. But it has to be now, before the directorate spins this their way. Claire looked at me, waiting. I thought of Linda, of Robert, of the quiet dinners that would never happen again. I thought of Ethan, my boy, twisted by forces bigger than both of us, yet still able to throw himself in front of a bullet at the end. Do it, I said. Price grinned, already pulling out his laptop. You won't regret this. But as I watched him type, as Claire slid the folder onto the desk, I wasn't so sure. Because some truths don't set you free. They just burn everything they touch. Daniel Price worked fast. By the second morning, he had scanned and encrypted most of the Erebus files, cross-referenced them with Claire's old memos, and pieced together a draft report. He showed it to us in the motel room, his fingers flying across the keys while his eyes lit with a kind of fever. He wasn't just writing a story, he was building a weapon. "This is the kind of thing that cracks the dam," he said, leaning back, the glow of the laptop screen making him look almost ghostly. "If I publish this, it won't matter who tries to discredit it. The details, the consistency, the sheer volume, it'll get traction." Claire was cautious. "You underestimate how quickly they can bury something. They've had years to build networks, allies, choke points. Once this is out, you'll have seconds before they hit back." Price nodded, but his grin didn't falter. "That's why we go wide. I've got channels, independent outlets, foreign press, encrypted leaks. They can't put all the fires out at once." I sat in the corner, revolver on the nightstand, staring at the floor. I wanted to believe him. God knows I did. But every part of me was still back in that rail yard, holding Ethan as the life left him. Truth might expose the directorate, but it wouldn't bring my boy back. It wouldn't give Robert his years. Price caught me staring at nothing. "You okay, Frank?" I blinked. Define okay. He didn't push. Maybe he knew better. That night, I dreamed of Ethan. Not the man I'd lost, but the boy he'd been, running across the backyard in sneakers too big for him, his laugh echoing like church bells. I woke with tears on my face, the cheap motel curtains letting in the first light of dawn. Claire sat at the desk, her pistol stripped down in front of her. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Price says he'll push it live tomorrow. After that, there's no going back." "Tomorrow," I repeated. The word felt heavy, final. She looked at me then, really looked, as if measuring whether I'd hold together or break apart. "When the directorate realizes what's happened, they'll come. They won't waste time on threats anymore." I nodded. Let them come. The next day was a blur of tension. Price hunched over the laptop, double-checking sources, prepping backups. Claire paced, her eyes flicking to the window every few minutes. I cleaned the revolver until the metal gleamed, though I doubted 6 rounds would mean much against what was coming. By late afternoon, Price leaned back, exhaled. "It's ready." His finger hovered over the trackpad. "Once I hit this, the files are mirrored across servers in 5 countries. Even if they kill me, it stays out there." "No ceremony?" I asked. He grinned faintly. "In this line of work, ceremony gets you killed." He clicked. A second later, the screen filled with confirmation messages. Files uploading. Copies distributing. The truth, leaving the confines of that dingy motel and scattering across the world. Claire's jaw tightened. Now we run. But it was already too late. Headlights cut across the parking lot. Black SUVs, more than one. Doors opened. Boots hit pavement. "They're here," Claire hissed, grabbing her gun. Price slammed the laptop shut. "I'll buy you time." "No," I snapped. "You've done your part. Stay behind me." We moved fast. Out the back door, across a strip of overgrown grass. Shouts erupted behind us. A gunshot cracked, glass shattering somewhere. We sprinted toward the tree line behind the motel, branches tearing at our clothes. Claire fired twice over her shoulder, the muzzle flash lighting the dusk. I pulled Price along, my chest screaming with every breath, my legs heavy as anchors. We made it to a drainage ditch, dropped into the mud. Bullets whined overhead. Price gasped beside me, clutching the laptop to his chest like a child. "They won't stop," he panted. "Neither will we," Claire shot back. We crawled through the ditch until it emptied into a culvert. The air stank of rot and stagnant water, but it shielded us. We crouched in the dark, listening to the boots pounding above, the shouts moving farther away. After what felt like hours, silence settled. Claire finally lowered her gun. We bought time. Not much, but some. Price was shaking, his knuckles white on the laptop. "It's out there now. They can kill me, kill you, but the story's out. They can't erase it." I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. The directorate wasn't just a few men in suits. It was a machine, bigger than any one story. Still, a machine bleeds when you cut it deep enough. Maybe we'd cut them. Maybe. We moved from safe house to safe house over the next week, never staying in one place long. The story spread online, fragments of it picked up by fringe outlets first, then bigger names. Some called it fake, others called it explosive. Hashtags started trending. TV pundits argued whether it was truth or conspiracy, but the directorate didn't sit idle. People connected to the leak started vanishing. A blogger in Ohio, a researcher in Berlin, even one of Price's old contacts, a name I didn't know but whose absence left him pale and shaking. And still, the story grew. Like a fire in dry brush, too many sparks to stamp out. One night, holed up in a cabin miles from the nearest road, Price turned to me. "Frank, you realize you're part of this now. Your name's out there. They'll call you a liar, a traitor, maybe worse. You'll never have your quiet life back." I looked at him, then at Claire. I lost that the day Ethan sent me that bottle. Neither of them argued. By the second week, I started seeing my son's face online. Not as Ethan Dalton, but as an unnamed operative linked to the directorate. Grainy photos, blurred silhouettes. They hadn't tied his name to it yet, but it was only a matter of time. That cut deeper than I expected. To the world, he'd be just another faceless cog in a machine. But to me, he was the boy who once fell asleep in the truck after fishing, head against my shoulder, line still tangled in his hands. I told Claire one night, if they put his name out there, I want the truth told. That he wasn't just theirs. That he was mine first. She nodded softly. We'll make sure of it. The story broke wide on a Monday morning. Not through one outlet, but dozens. Screens lit with headlines. Leaked documents expose shadow directorate, secret experiments on human subjects, poison as control. Price's network had done its job. I sat in a diner off the interstate, a ball cap pulled low, watching the televisions mounted above the counter. News anchors argued about authenticity, about implications, about whether this was the biggest scandal since Watergate or just another fever dream. A waitress poured me coffee without asking. She didn't recognize me. That anonymity felt like a gift, fleeting though it was. By noon, the denials came. Government spokesmen called it fabricated. Corporate leaders claimed forgery. But the documents kept spreading. Independent experts confirmed details, traced funding lines, matched signatures. The directorate's name was on too many lips to vanish overnight. Claire slid into the booth across from me, her hair tucked under a hoodie. It's working. They're rattled. I nodded, though my chest felt hollow. And Ethan? Her eyes softened. His name hasn't surfaced yet. Maybe it won't. I wanted to believe her. But truth has a way of pulling everything into its current, even the things you'd rather leave buried. The retaliation came 3 nights later. We were in another safe house, a basement apartment in a forgotten part of the city. Price was on the laptop, fielding calls, dodging threats. Claire cleaned her pistol for the 100th time. I sat at the table, staring at nothing. Then the door blew in. Flashbang. White light, deafening crack. Shouts. Boots. Claire was up in an instant, firing into the smoke. Price dove under the desk, clutching the laptop. I hit the floor, ears ringing, hands scrabbling for the revolver. Figures stormed in, black-clad, masked, rifles raised. Directorate. Chaos. Bullets punched holes in plaster. Furniture splintered. Claire shouted, Price screamed, and I finally got my revolver up, firing blind. One of the masked men dropped. Another pushed forward. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. They pulled back. Smoke cleared. Silence fell, broken only by Price's ragged breathing. On the wall, scrawled in spray paint, were 3 words, "You can't win." We relocated again. Price was shaken but alive, the laptop intact. The story kept running, each new detail feeding the fire. But so did the threats. Emails, phone calls, shadows outside every window. I asked Claire once, how long can we keep this up? She didn't answer right away. Then she said, as long as it takes. But I could see it in her eyes. She was tired too. Weeks passed. The directorate didn't collapse, but cracks showed. Hearings were announced. Investigations opened. Whistleblowers came forward, emboldened by the leak. The machine was still turning, but slower, grinding, struggling to keep pace with the firestorm. One evening, Price shoved a newspaper across the table. Congress demands answers. Beneath it, a photo of men in suits, their faces tight with discomfort. You see, he said, we did it. They can't bury this anymore. Claire smiled faintly. I didn't. Because victory didn't feel like victory. It felt like ashes. Ethan was gone. Robert was gone. Linda was alone. My life, whatever it had been, was shattered into pieces I couldn't glue back together. I walked outside, sat on the motel steps, and watched the sunset bleed across the sky. A boy on a bike rode past, laughing, his voice carrying on the warm air. For a second, I saw Ethan in him, small again, free of the weight that had crushed him. I closed my eyes and let the sound fade. The final choice came quietly. Price wanted me to go public, to put my name and face on the record, to testify, to be the father who lost his son to the directorate's machine. It'll give the story teeth, he said. They can't dismiss it as rumor if you're the one telling it. Claire warned against it. They'll make you a target. They'll twist your words, drag your name through the mud. Maybe worse. You've done enough, Frank. Let it be. For 2 nights, I wrestled with it. I thought of Ethan, his last words in the rail yard. I didn't mean for Robert. I thought of Robert himself, the kind of man who never looked away from hard truths. And I thought of Linda, sitting alone in her house, wondering why her husband had died. On the 3rd morning, I gave Price my answer. Use my name. Use my story. Let them know this isn't just papers and files. Let them know it's blood. The hearings began. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted. My name was dragged through headlines, dissected on talk shows. Some called me a hero. Others called me a liar, a bitter old man inventing stories about his dead son. I sat in a gray suit that didn't quite fit, hands folded, and told them everything. The bottle, the poison, the vial that vanished, Robert's death, Ethan's silence, the truth I'd learned in blood and fire. Some faces listened, others sneered, but the words were out. Once spoken, they couldn't be unspoken. When it was over, I walked out into the sunlight, cameras flashing, questions shouted. Claire at my side, Price a step behind. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not free, not unbroken, but light, as if a burden had finally shifted from my shoulders onto the world's. The directorate didn't vanish. Men like that never do. They regrouped, rebranded, found new shadows to crawl into. But they were wounded, exposed, and the world was watching in a way it hadn't before. That was the best we could do. One evening, months later, I stood on my porch, a glass of water in hand. The fields stretched out golden in the fading sun. For a moment, it almost felt like the old days, when Linda was alive and Ethan was still mine. I spoke aloud, to no one and to both of them. I did what I could. I hope it was enough. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Life went on. That's how it ends. Not with triumph. Not with despair. With something in between, a scar, a wound, and the faintest glimmer of hope. Because sometimes, that's all we get.